So Ken and Sharon are both on the way, but we're going to call this meeting to order. It is 2:36 p.m. on this 5th of March. And this is the March meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee for AMATS. Welcome, everybody. And first up is roll call. We're barely at quorum. Mr. Lindemood?
Present.
Mr. Hanson?
Here.
Mr. Weaver?
Here.
Mr. Boyd?
Here.
Ms. Morris?
Present.
I'm feeling a little outnumbered here. But we do have a quorum right now. Great. I know you have a couple people to introduce. We have some special people in the crowd today.
We do. We just had our federal certification review from FHWA and FTA, and they'll do a presentation later on, our first informational item, but we have from FHWA our district office in Juneau, John Laurie. He is the acting transportation planner right now. He's been with them quite a while down there, but right now he's been filling in for the position of Rankin Phil. And then we also have Brian Betleon, who is from the Resource
Center.
Resource Center in Baltimore, Maryland. You can kind of blame him for this because he was the gentleman who taught the Introduction to Metropolitan Transportation Planning course that I took in 2003. So.
Yeah,
He's
that's right.
And any complaints with me?
Just remember the problem students.
Well, welcome both of you. I look forward to hearing about the certification. Hopefully it's all right. And Craig, would you mind making that public announcement?
That all of our AMATS meetings are public meetings, and the public is invited to comment. If we have a business item, we'll have a presentation by staff or a consultant, and then at that point the committee will discuss it, and then the public will be invited to comment. If you are going to comment, please make sure you state your name for the record.
Great, thank you. So first up on the agenda is actually the approval of the agenda. Who?
Second.
Moved by Ms. Lindemood and seconded by Mr. Anton and Mr. Morris. Are there any changes? Are there any opposed to the approval? Hearing none, we are so moved. It is approved. Next up is the approval of the minutes. We have two sets before us. The first is January 8th of 2015.
Move to approve.
Oh, that's fast. I know. I'm going to say moved by Mr. Morris, seconded by Mr. Hanson.
I didn't open my mouth, but I think.
All right, seconded by Mr. Lindbergh.
Pick someone.
All right. Are there any changes or modifications to the January 8th minutes? Let the record show that we filed Mr. Index. 239. Yeah. Any opposed to the approval of January 8th? Hearing none, those are approved. Next up before us is the continuation of the January 8th meeting to January 13th.
Move to approve.
Moved by Ms. Lindemood, seconded by Mr. Morris. Are there any opposed to the approval of those minutes? Hearing none, we are so moved. Thank you for keeping us up to task on those, keeping us very close on those meeting minutes. It's funny how something that just happened that recent seems like a distant memory sometimes when you're reading them. So, right on to the business items. We have quite a few ahead of us today. And first up is the 2015 to 18 TIP Administrative Modification number 2.
This will be fast. Unless we have lots of questions and Mr. Lindewood wants to expand on them. But basically, these are monies in Table 7, which is again outside of our AMATS allocation. There are federal funds within the AMATS boundaries, and there are the railroads funds that they have control over. And so they have some changes around. I don't believe that there's any increase in money. They're just moving some funding around. They are listed on the front there, and then in Table 7, you'll see them in red on, I believe, the second page of Table 7, which is again the railroad portion. So, it's an administrative modification. This is something, again, that admin mods are approved by the TAC, and we notify the policy committee. So, your final step on this, according to our policy and procedures. Happy to entertain questions.
Do you have anything to add?
Someone in our grant side decided to move money from one bucket to another. That's all I know.
Are there any questions? Are there any questions from the public at this time on this administrative modification number 2? All right, hearing none.
Before we vote, can we recognize that Mr. Morton showed up?
Yes, that's true. Let the record show.
Glad to be here.
All right, hearing no public comment, the matter now lies with the committee.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Boyle, second by Mr. Lindsay. Are there any opposed to the motion? Hearing none, we are so moved. Yes, I saw that. Yay. I'll let everybody know I was rather lonely sitting at the table with only 3 of us for the beginning, wondering. We have business items. All right, I'm gonna move some paper for a moment before. All right, we're moving on to second business item. Item 5B, the interim 2035 MTP financial plan.
So this is supposed to be Vivian's intro, but I believe she's trying to get help from IT because we're having some issues getting the Excel open, which we need you guys to see. But we're gonna have a presentation, so if you guys wanna disperse so we can show it to you.
Do we need to bring any paperwork with us when we?
Only if you need to make notes. I would probably, yeah, if you wanna bring some of these here with you and then maybe the sources and methodologies, but we're not gonna really ask you to do anything with it yet, so it's just if you wanna follow along. Oh, yes. Sorry, I was going to wait until everyone settled down because I have a couple announcements to make. But I am Ariel Galen. I am the Anchorage Area Planner for the Department of Transportation, and I'm currently in the acting role of the AMATS Planner until that position is filled, so double duty for a while. One thing to kind of point out, there's a lot of information that you're going to be seeing, not necessarily on screen, but that I will be telling you. It looks like IT is now playing around with the computer, so we may be waiting for a few minutes or so. And I do want to apologize if I have to stop for a minute and look at my notes. I am dealing with 2 different large documents that I'm trying to get out some information to you guys. So I have some notes kind of scattered around the room that I may have to refer to while we're in the middle of the presentation. So basically what we're doing is we're doing an update to the 2035 MTP, Metropolitan Transportation Plan, that was previously adopted a few years ago, and this is an interim update to kind of allow us to have a little more time to be able to do our next update for 2040. So, remote desktop. So we'll be kind of going through a lot of the information that we had to previously assumed, and then what we had to update for this financial plan.
Timing's everything.
Yep. Perfect timing. I apologize for the delay. They're trying to, okay, so what's happened is this computer is too old to be able to open the Excel.
Yeah, I know.
So they're having to do a remote desktop connection to Vivian's computer.
I know. I was going to say, what's next on the agenda? I never know what's next. Policy committee recruitment. Well, I don't know. I didn't know if we wanted.
I don't really know how long this is going to take to get through.
Do that, or we can do
Start
some
info.
info items.
Yeah. We need to make a motion for that.
Just jump down and
We
do
already
it.
approved the agenda.
Oh my gosh. Maybe.
Wait,
We'll try it. If they kick us out, then maybe move on to something else. So here's kind of what we're going to be going through for this presentation. We're going to be looking at the revenue sources and forecasts, what we kind of previously had approved. And then we'll move into, we're kind of doing them at the same time so you can see a side-by-side comparison of what was approved and then what we're looking at right now. So we'll go into the interim revenue sources and forecasts, what's changed, and then, so that's kind of what we received versus what we respected, and it's, are our assumptions reasonable? Still reasonable. That's kind of the evaluation that we have at the very end. So we're going to get into the revenues. So there's four main things that we looked at for the interim MTP analysis. We did an inflation rate for construction, and this allows us to be able to actually get the cost of projects into year of expenditure dollars. So if there's something in 2035, you have to be able to show how much it's going to cost in 2035 dollars. And so how good was our prediction? So we'll kind of look at the rates then and now. Project costs, we've updated them to 2014 dollars, and I'll show you a quick slide that shows you the 2010 costs that we used at the time and the 2014 costs that we're using now to see kind of how we did. Then we have the inflation rate for net revenue, and I'll kind of go in that more, but it's a question, any adjustments to the CPI? And then revenue by sources, are they still reasonable? Did we have to add or remove any of them? So the first thing, oh, and I just want to say, if you have any questions, just please ask, don't hesitate, it'll be a lot. The first thing we're looking at is project cost inflation. So on the left, I don't know why the title is not there, is the 2035 MTP cost inflation amounts. So what we did for road, bike, ped, trail is we used a 4%. And the reason we used the 4% at the time is because that's what was being used by the STIP, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. And we used it for the short term, which is 2011 through 2023. Then for the long term, we used a lower, a 3.5%, because we wanted to recognize that there's a lot of volatility the further you move out, and it kind of gets a little harder to be able to nail down the exact amount. We wanted to account for the fact that prices will probably drop with oil, if oil dropped or if construction of projects dropped as well. And then transit cost inflation. And Lance, please speak up if I misspeak on this one. So at the time, we were actually assuming everything in year of expenditure dollars for transit. So at the time, it was already built into the cost of the project, so we didn't have an additional inflation amount added to the projects as we were doing them from year to year. So now for the interim. Well, as you all know, oil has taken a small little dip downwards, and so that has allowed project costs to decrease as well, specifically construction materials, so asphalt, because oil drives a lot of what we do for the construction. So in the short term, we were originally going to do 3%, but after the TAC work session last week, we dropped it down to 2.5% to recognize that it is significantly lower right now in the short term. And then looking at the long term, we decided to keep it at 3.5% to keep it consistent with the MTP, recognizing that oil prices are going to go up, hopefully, in the future. And then also we moved to transit. We kind of changed how we did transit because we wanted to reflect an inflation in the transit dollars, the cost of the projects. So we added a 1.5% inflation for those, and that was working with the transit for the Muni, and they helped us determine what that percentage would be. Okay, sorry. So any questions on the cost inflations? Okay. So here are the overall project costs. So on the left, we have the 2035 project costs. And as you can see, road project costs for all of the 2010s was $2.03 billion. For the bike ped, it was $99 million. And for the transit project costs, it was $239 million. So I'll kind of walk through what we did for the project costs and explain it. So for the roads, we actually were able to narrow down what projects and get a cost estimates from them. We got cost estimates from the Department of Transportation and from the Municipality of Anchorage, and then any studies that had, such as the Eagle River CBD study, and there were a few others that we looked at to give us a rough estimate for 2010. So as you can see, it's there. Then we have the bike ped. So this one was a little trickier, but what we did is we actually took the cost estimates that were in the bike ped trails plans, and we inflated them to current year of expenditure dollars. So, for example, some of the plans were in 2007 or 2010, or what was the trails plan in? I forget what year that was done. 1999. Yeah, the 1999 one. So we took those and we inflated them per year by whatever cost we were using for inflation in the short term at that time to get current year project costs. And then transit project costs was provided by Transit Municipality of Anchorage Department for us, so we kind of plugged that in. So as you can see, total project costs in 2010 dollars for the 2035 was $2.3 billion. So I just want to point out that is not the overall cost that all of those projects would cost us by 2035. That is a significantly bigger number, but I just wanted to show you what 2010's was. So for the interim, the road projects, we got updated numbers from the Municipality of Anchorage and the Department of Transportation. We plugged those in, and as you can see, it's interesting how this happened because 4 years have passed, so you would expect a big difference, but because some projects went up and some projects went down, it actually kind of leveled out. And we're doing pretty good, honestly, if you look at the difference between the two. The interim bike ped trails cost. So even though we inflated it out, because our cost inflation went down, the overall cost of the bike ped projects went down as well. And then the transit projects, we kept them because there was no inflation before. There was no way for us to be able to kind of judge what inflation we should use this time. We could probably have used the 1.5, but it wasn't something that we really decided on, and so we just kind of left it as is for now for the cost of it. So the total cost in 2014 dollars is $2.4 billion. As you can see, we're doing pretty good. Things haven't skyrocketed too greatly. Any questions on the costs and how we did those? Okay. Now we'll move on to revenue inflation assumptions. Super easy, so I love this slide. So for the 2035 MTP, what we did is FHWA guidance talks that CPI is a good way to be able to judge cost inflation. Because what you have to do is if you're having a revenue inflation, if you have cost inflation of projects, you're also going to have revenue inflation of projects, or you're never ever going to be able to come close to keeping up with getting all the projects constructed. So for the 2035, we looked at the Anchorage Consumer Price Index, so the CPI, from 1983 to 2010, and we took an average of that, and it gave us a 2.5%. So in this update, we decided to kind of make it a little more realistic, because 1983 to 2010 was a huge gap of years, and there are a lot of ups and downs. There's some years that's 0.4, other years that's almost 5, and it was such a huge variable, so we decided to cut it down to 10 years, because it's a reasonable amount in our assumption, to see kind of what it gave us. So we did 2004 to 2014, and we did add in the 2014 numbers, which went down a little. So as you can see, we're at 2.6%. So it's a 0.1% higher. And it is close, and it doesn't make too much of an impact on the MTP overall. Any questions on that? It's very nerve-wracking standing in front of you all because you're just like... So I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong. Okay, so we have the revenue assumptions for local. So what we did is we had to divide it into 3 subcategories: local, state, and federal. Those are the main sources of where the revenue is going to be coming from. So we'll start with local. For the 2035, one of the ones that we looked at is MOA bonds. So the MOA bonds for projects, and they have a CIP that kind of says how much they're expecting or they hope to be able to get, kind of, I guess, a wish list like anyone else. We looked at the 2011 through 2016 CIP that they had developed at that time and used those numbers for the 2011 to 2016 in the MTP. And then it was averaged to be able to get us the 2017 and inflated in 2024 by CPI. Then we had the transit match to FTA funds. Pretty simple. The match is an 80-20, so 80% federal, 20% match. And again, the muni bonds for the match, sorry, Jamie.
Yep.
And so we have to reflect that amount in there. So we just kind of do a hard 20% of all FTA funds that came into the program at the time and just said that's how much match we're going to be assuming. And then we had 50% local match for transportation enhancements and CMAQ funds. So this is kind of a little confusing because it's not an actually 50% match, but what we're saying is that we're splitting the amount that's matched. So 50% of the projects will be paid for by the muni for local funds and 50% will be paid for by the state. because it's really hard for us to be able to calculate out this one was paid for by the state, this one was paid for by local bonds. Some of them are kind of a mix match together. So at the time they decided to split it down the center and just say half will go for each one and kind of account for it that way. So what this gave us is 4% of the projected revenue is assumed from local sources. So what did we do for the interim? So we updated the CIP. 2011 through 14 are actual bonds that they received, and 2016 through 2020 is the CIP numbers that we worked with the Muni to be able to come up with. So what we did is we took the 2011 through 2020 and averaged them for 2021, and then we started inflating them in 2022 by CPI. So the next one for the transit funds, same thing. We saw no reason to make any kind of adjustments to it. It's still an 80-20 split, so we move forward as is. And same thing with the 50-20. That should say local match for transportation alternatives because it was changed from enhancements to alternatives. But we still kept it at the 50% state, 50% local. Interestingly enough, as you can see, it still is 4% of the projected revenue from local sources. The reason for this is because of the fact that everything went down altogether, and it went down at kind of the same amount. So it was able to keep local sources at a 4%. Any questions on that one? Just as an aside, these are kind of the major ones. There may be smaller little ones like additional matches, like specific pots that I do not talk about just because it's all been kind of lumped in together to help save time. So this is the state side. The 2035 MTP, this was a lot of work. We looked at the capital budget from 2005. It's really the 26 state capital budget to the 2011 capital budget at the time to find out everything that had been appropriated to MTP projects on the NHS and non-NHS. So we're very limited in what we looked. We didn't just assume everything that came into Anchorage, only things that were for MTP related projects. So we got that information for the 11 through 16, and then we took 17 was an average of the 2006 to 2011. Actually, sorry, no, I'm thinking of the new one. So 2011 was actual appropriations. 2012 was an average of 2006 through 2011, and we stuck that in there and we applied CPI starting in 2013. The next one, Alaska Transportation Fund. This was an interesting one because it was brought up, legislation was brought forward or mentioned, and it was we felt justified in being able to put it into the MTP at the time. And this is where we worked with the TAC members to say if it was something they were comfortable and reasonable to assume. So what this was is in 2015, $350 million would go into a separate pot of money. It'd be an infusion of money, and there'd be a 5% return. That 5% return would be spent throughout the state for transportation projects. Now, at the direction of the TAC, it was established that 28% of that amount of money would be used for AMATS. So in 2016, we'd be getting 28% of that 5% return. And at the time, I'm going to see if I have I don't have a dollar figure for it to give you an average. So the next one, state geo bonds. This one, we looked at the capital budget starting in 2000 to 2011, 2001 to 2011 at the time, and we looked for every geo bond that was happening. We only found two at the time. It was 2002 and 2008. So what we did is we figured, there's 2002, 2008, 6-year difference. Based on historical trends, we'll assume another one in 6 years. So 2014 would be the hit. So we averaged it, put it in 2014, and then we assumed 6 years after that every year for the life of the MTP. So it only gave us 4 bond hits total, and we increased it by CPI over the years. Alaska Mental Health Trust Fund for Transit. This is a tough one, so I have to refer to my notes. And I apologize because I'm not the best at transit. So this is provided by the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority. Funds are made available to the Alaska Community Transit Office for distribution to transit services, and it's a 25% of the ACT, the Alaska Community Transit allocation, is given to the Alaska Mental Health Trust to distribute through a competitive grant process to AMATS for human services. mouthful.
It's a lot.
So I'm not going to repeat that on the next slide. So I hope it's okay. So we worked with Transit to get that information. That was they helped get us all of that information, the actuals or what they programmed to get. And then we had state match for FHWA and FTA funds. It's a 90.97 federal funds, 9.03% match is required. And, on FHWA and FTA has the 80-20. So we have 56% of the projected revenues in the 2035 MTP is from state sources. So the interim, pretty easy. We just kind of updated what you see here. So the legislative appropriations, we did 10 years of an average. So we went from 2005, 2006 to 2015, got all the appropriations to MTP projects, road, bike ped, and put it in there. Then we averaged it out for 20, this is where it gets kind of tough. We actually zeroed out 2016, 2017, and 2018 in recognition of the fact that the state is going to be going through some hard times in their revenue sources soon, and so we don't want to be overly optimistic in our assumptions. So what we did is we waited until 2019 to take an average of the 2006 to 2015 numbers and start applying CPI 2016 to get us what that number would be in 2019. So it's a way to account for inflation as the years go on. Next, the Alaska Transportation Fund. So this one, we had to push out almost as far as humanly possible, just because things have changed recently. And right now, there's nothing up to say that the Alaska Transportation Fund is going to happen. However, it doesn't mean it will never happen. And it's one of those things. Is it reasonable for us to assume this? What we did is we pushed it out to 2025. So instead of 2015 getting the infusion of money, 2025 would get the infusion of money. We accounted for inflation. We said $400 million. We still kept the 5% return and the 28% going to AMATS. The next, Alaska Mental Health Trust, basically same thing, worked with Transit to get this one, to get all the information for this one, and applied CPI in 2020, I believe, to inflate it out. And again, state match funds. So for this one, you can see that we had only 41%, or we will have 41% of the projected revenues assumed from state sources. So this one we're taking a significant hit on, which I think reflects kind of how things are going to be for the next few years. Any questions on the state? Federal. Hooray. So this one, we have FTA funds to the MOA. So this is a laundry list of funds, and I'll just read off a quick few. So this is funds that are 5309, competitive funds, 5317, 5316, and what were some of the, there's a whole bunch of them that we list together to go in there. And that also includes railroad funds at the time. And this is railroad funds for track maintenance and things like that. And we worked with Bruce Carr to get what amount they would feel comfortable with. It was about $1 million a year for the railroad. FHWA funds for NHS projects we collected by using the STIPs at the time. The 2010 through 13 STIP gave us the 11 through 12 numbers, and the 2012 through 15 STIP gave us the 13, 14, and 15 numbers. Technically, they were zeroed out in the STIP to recognize the fact that the feds were going to be going through a severe reduction, about a 30% reduction or more in federal funds. So we had them zeroed out in the STIP or in the MTP, and then after those 3 years, we averaged what we had gotten before, and we applied CPI to inflate it out for future years. We were really expecting a huge hit there. And then NHS funds was based on the AMATS allocation from the STIP. So again, 2010 through 13 and 2012 through 15, except we actually knew what the amount was. It was not zeroed out in the STIP. So we took the lowest amount that they had in there, and we carried it out for the rest of the years, applying CPI in 2024. The reason we didn't zero that out is because it was reasonable to assume that the AMATS would still continue to receive some allocation. And that amount was decided upon based on what was in the STIP, and at the time the TAC felt comfortable with that amount. Next are HSIP funds. This one, again, worked with the STIP to get the amounts in there, and we inflated it by CPI starting in 2024. FHWA Other. So these are discretionary funds such as Tiger grants, livability grants, and it was assumed that when MAP 21 would come in, it would allow us to try for and receive $5 million worth of discretionary grants starting in 2015 for the life of the project. So just a side note, the reason why we were kind of assuming a huge reduction here is because MAP 21 was going to be coming in the next few years. So this was going from Safety Lou to MAP 21. And so some of the preliminary bills that were coming out for MAP 21, what they kind of wanted to do but not actually enacted, were significantly lower than what had been in Safety Lou. So this gave us 40% of the projected revenues from federal sources. Interim MTP update. Pretty easy. FTA funds, we just updated to what they are. We worked with the railroad to get how much they felt comfortable for us saying, and those numbers came from the tip out to 2020, and then we averaged them out and then increased it by CPI from there. FHWA funds, we were actually able to use the allocated amounts that we got, or the obligated amounts we got from 2011 through 14, and then average those and carry them out to 2035. And same with non-NHS, we actually used the AMATS allocation that they received, and we used our own obligation reports to come up with those. So we, again, used obligated amounts to be able to determine what we got there. And then we looked at the STIP to see what the AMATS allocation is currently, and we just carried that forward, applying CPI starting in 2020. HSIP funds, again, we used the obligated amounts, and then we used what was in the tip to kind of estimate how much was going to be for future years, starting CPI inflation in 2020. So this one, we actually cut FHWA other. What happened is during the 2011 through 14 timeframe, we received one grant to transit for $50,000. However, due to it taking a little more to administer the grant, it was going to cost more than the grant was actually giving them. So they decided to turn the money down. So based on that, we had to cut the entire thing from our program. Just because there was no realistic that we're going to get it anytime soon, and discretionary funding on its own is going to be a little tougher in the future. However, because things were not as dire as we had expected with the MAP 21 transition, we assume to receive 55% of our projected revenue from federal sources. Any questions on the federal side? Okay. So here's just a quick chart so you guys can see the comparison between this two. It's, a severe reduction in state funds and an increase in federal funds, or really a maintaining of levels in federal funds. That's kind of what we're kind of showing in the MTP. We're not really showing any huge spikes of federal funds. We're just saying that from here on, it's going to be mostly level until we hear otherwise. So these ones, some people were very fond of them, the arrhythmia charts as they were called, to kind of show you this was the 2035 predicted. And as you can see, we had these huge spikes here for state, and state was really going to take off, and it was going to start funding a lot more of the MTP projects. And federal was kind of leveling off for a little while after it took a big spike in 2013, and then kind of climbed back up but leveled off. And locals down there kind of paying for maintenance and drainage and everything like that. This is what we actually got. As you can see, we have a huge spike in 2013, and that's for the GEO bonds. So I just want to point out that these big spikes here are the GEO bonds, not what we expect to be getting every year in funds. But we just want to be able to show that, look, every once in a while, it's reasonable to assume some kind of blip in the money to be able to pay for things. And this shows that the feds, for the most part, will be above state, which is kind of what we're predicting, and local stays about the same, paying for what they need to. And these are just some other charts showing you kind of the revenue, how it was looking, that state was going to be taking over, but in actuality, we show federal taking over or keeping level. Excel time. So I want to show it.
Excuse me, I need to tap your thumb drive, please.
Oh, it's already on the computer.
I need to put it on my computer.
Okay.
I'm sorry for the mix-up, we had a technical difficulty. This is an older form of Excel, and the conversion factor doesn't work. So I'm going to play Wonder Woman and be right back.
Well, she's gone, I'll kind of continue on. But basically what we're going to try and show you in the Excel is how the Excel works, what the Excel is, and then where we're at currently with the program.
Quick question. Did the amount change over the time, or the amounts come down?
So the overall amounts
You
for
showed the
revenue.
percentages.
Yes, so what actually happened is the overall amounts for revenue did go down by about 400 million over the life of the project, which is pretty reasonable to assume, kind of as, you know, current fiscal constraints are coming in for both federal and state. And unfortunately, that's not on this slide, but it is on some of the handouts. I can talk about those actually real quick. So I don't know if everyone got them, but these two handouts here are a quick comparison between the two MTPs. One is the 2035 MTP showing what we expected to get for 2011 through 14, and then the other is the interim update, what we, what we actually got through 2011 through 2014. So for the most part, it went down for federal or for roadway projects. And that just has to do with state bond or state monies going down. But federal itself kind of was significantly higher than we expected. Bike ped went up a little, and that has to do with the fact that the federal side went up. So we're kind of assuming, I forgot to mention that. So with the non-NHS allocation, which is the AMATS allocation, the amount that we actually have in there, we reduced by 10% for enhancements, alternatives, non-motorized, 10% for CMAC, and then 15% for pavement replacement. So when we talk about kind of what the actual amount is, it may look a little different, but that's just because we're factoring in those percentages that are accounted for elsewhere in the spreadsheet. Okay.
Are we ready to get out of here?
Yeah, go ahead. And transit went up. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that MAP 21 actually initiated a few new revenue sources for transit. And so we're accounting for those, as well as showing the old sources. Kind of, we got a few years of those, and then we taper them off to zero. Do you have the thumb drive plugged in? Okay, so go ahead and go to start. Yeah, from the computer. And key. There we go. You'll have to go into the folder. Yep. And you'll do the cell in there. Okay. Okay. Yep. Okay, so what we have here, this is the Excel that we constructed to be able to come up with a lot of this information.
Aaron, you can't. You need to focus.
Is it out of focus?
Yeah. Unless I'm blind.
It's just so small.
So we're not really going to go through a lot of this information, or what you see up here. We just need to kind of show it to you to be able to show you that we have the ability to fine tune this information really quickly and kind of what it looks like. This first page here is just all of the revenue sources combined. And so we have everything listed here, kind of everything I went through, and then we have notes at the bottom of where we came up with them. So how is it that we can justify what it is that we're doing? And so that kind of gives us a total amount at the end. Over the life of the entity, we say about $3.4 billion is what we would be expecting to get. So this is the one page that we wanted to show you, because this is the really key one. So I'll probably walk up here just to point out what we're doing. Oops, sorry. I hate you bad. So sorry for the blurriness, but so what we did is we actually came in here and we wanted to figure out, this is part of Lance's famous spreadsheet that we've expanded upon. And it was our way of being able to show year of expenditure dollars. So we started out here with what is our short-term 2010 cost. And so this is transit, and this is bike ped road. And so from here to here, to get to 2011, we inflated it out by whatever our cost inflation was at the time to get us 2011 year of expenditure dollars. And that was basically how the program started, or how we're starting our MTP. This line in here, the yellow, is how much revenue total we are receiving for this particular line item. So for roads, bikes, peds, and trails, how much we're receiving. This down here is this total cost here minus the revenue, giving how much we have left over in those year of expenditure dollars. Now to move them forward into next year, we would have to, this is actually 2.5, not 3. I just didn't correct the percentages before today. So we multiply it by this to get how much we have in 2012 year of expenditure dollars. So we carry it over and we begin the process all over again. And so you can see kind of our total as we're going through. We're slowly winding down, which is the goal of this, to be able to get to 0 or below. However, when we get to the long-term projects, we have to add those back in. So this portion is just for the short term. We carry out 2023 and 2024 is the split year that we decided upon. So when you get to 2023, you hope you're at 0 or as close as possible. So what you do is you have to take this amount here plus whatever your long-term projects are in year of expenditure dollars, so in 2024 dollars, and add them together. Because you have to be able to count for everything that you've deferred from previous years and everything you still have remaining for that particular year, for the long term of 2024 starting year. And you just start the cycle all over again. You have the total here, the revenue, and then you get this total, and then you inflate it out. So what's interesting about this one here is I can show you kind of how we do things. So this gets us an amount where we're 3.7 million over. So that is not where we are at right now. That was before the TAC work session when we talked with the members and kind of came up with a different way of doing it. So if I change the inflation amounts, if I go all the way, all of this information is all backup, or all the tabs on the bottom is all backup, and it's all how we collected the information in case anyone has questions. So this one is the inflation rates. So if we change it to 2.5% in the short term, and yes, Stephanie, I will use your formula. And so this here, you can see all of our inflation. So we have long-term, short-term, we have transit, and then we have our revenue inflation. So everything's kind of driven out of this page here and attached to all the other Excel spreadsheets. So now, instead of being 3.7 million over, we're 81 million under. So that means we have extra money just kind of sitting there. But that brings up a really good point. So, are we going to take any projects out of the MTP, the interim MTP? No, we are not, because we are fiscally constrained at this point. If we have money left over, are we going to add any projects in? No, we are not. Why? Because we are just doing an interim update until we can get to the 2024 MTP. When we get to there, then we can reevaluate projects and assess where we are financially for revenue and costs. So I just kind of wanted to show you that fiscally we are constrained for the interim MTP. Now, can I get back to my presentation from here? Yes. Okay. I know, that's fine.
Is that yours or is that?
It might be an older version, but it's okay. So what we have here, the assumptions. We went through and we looked at all the assumptions, and after evaluating, we assessed that the assumptions are reasonable and have been updated in advance of the 2040 MTP. What's really crucial about what we've done now is we've done a lot of work for an interim update, but it allows us to be able to get it ready and get it mostly done for the 2040 update, which saves us a lot of time. So we can focus on getting that done on time as well. And we will not have to do any additional modeling for the interim update or remove projects or add projects. So I guess I'll ask questions before I talk about our next steps. Any questions? Yes.
Aaron, did you guys take out the projects that were completed?
Thank you. Another one I forgot. So we actually had a discussion about this, and I kind of brought it up to the group as we were, Vivian and I and Jamie, as we were working on this. So we were having an issue. If we were going to remove projects that were completed during the 2011-2014 timeframe, we were also going to have to remove funding. And there was no way for us to be able to separate out the funding for those particular projects from the funding that's there for the other projects, because it would just cause too many problems for us at the time. So we basically assumed we're leaving those alone until the 2040. When the 2040 hits, then we will go through and identify the projects that are completed, remove those from the project cost side of it, and also remove all the funding from I'm presuming 2011, 2012, 2013, and probably 2014, and start at 2015 for the revenue assumptions.
And then just an observation, when I saw those two pie charts,
Mhm.
this interim MTP financial split, federal to state, looks a lot like the LRTP that we had prior to the one that we are in. It was, the pies used, this interim looks like the one, like the LRTP used to look.
So I removed that slide because I didn't think they would want to see the LRTP percentages, but of course I should have had it in. Yes, it does look
No,
like
I just, just.
the previous, what was it, the 2027? That was the update. It was, yeah, something like that. The previous LRTP that helped us build the 2035 MTP.
Is it in an older spreadsheet?
No, it'd take forever to do it, so.
I seem to recall, I thought the feds, because we had the earmarks as well, was close to 70%.
Yeah, it was like 60 something. It was,
Yeah.
it was 50, it was 60-40 or thereabouts,
Without
which
the
is
earmarks,
close.
it was probably a lot lower, but, because we did have to account for that. Earmarks were like 11% of the overall. It was amazing.
Nice job, Eric.
So it's a lot. So thank you for sitting through my presentation. So next steps. So the next thing we have to do, if these assumptions are approved, we will have to take them to the policy committee. Your guys' recommendation more than likely be, yes, we approve it, send it on to the policy committee for approval. And I wasn't too sure about this, if we would have to release it for public review or not for the revenue assumptions. I don't remember what we did last time because I was not as involved in that. So that's kind of up for what you guys think, yay or nay about that. And then we will be working on getting a draft interim update document for public review to you guys to release it or forward it on to the policy committee for release in June. So what we're hoping to do is get you guys a draft to look at in May for release in June. Hence why we have been pushing very quickly on getting these done. And then our last thing is we have to have the document final and approved by December 31st of 2015. So that is our goal, and I am confident we can make it.
We're on track right now.
Yes.
Okay.
If I may, could I?
Go, please, Vivian,
I want to
yes.
thank Aaron and Penny for just stepping right in. I'm sorry I was working on the technical difficulties, but we got that worked out. So for this item, you have a memo that has some changes, the changes in red that are the ones that Aaron just went over. And also you have the methodology, you have the revenue sources and methodology sheet that looks like this. That looks like this. And this describes at a higher level the revenue sources that we're asking you to approve. It explains, it's a summary of what Aaron just went through. To be able to extend the life of the current MTP, there are some basic steps that we have to do. And reassessing the financial plan and fiscal constraint is one of those. And to do that, we have to work very closely with the state and with the public transportation provider, which is People Mover, which we have done. And we had the TAC work session on Monday. We had six TAC members there. And it was their opinion that this was a reasonable approach as it's been amended today. So what we're asking the Technical Advisory Committee to approve is the information that's in the updated memo for today and this revenue sources and methodology sheet.
And I forgot to mention, but Jennifer and I did work with Department of Transportation headquarters folks, Mike Crabb and Sarah Mason, to go over our assumptions for everything, the revenue, especially the state side and the federal side, and then the inflations, and they have given their consent and approval of our assumptions.
I should applaud you, that's so good.
I know.
Like, so-
Yes, I'm done with the presentation, but I'm here for questions if you have them.
I was going to say, is there any questions from the committee for Aaron and staff at this time?
I would just like to commend Aaron and Vivian and Teresa. I mean, all the staff really. I know that they worked really hard on this. They put a lot of time, and I just think it's great. I mean, I helped you out a little bit in the beginning, and then sort of moved on to other things. But I think you did a really good job. I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that.
I gotta say, James, that the game seems to have been stepped up since you left.
Make sure that gets.
Municipal staff is dipping our toe in the water. I mean, Lance created the spreadsheet, Aaron significantly enhanced it, and in the last MTFP update, basically, staff was supposed to be working on public involvement. So this is a new area, and it is somewhat demystified after having worked with Aaron on this, but he definitely has taken the lead on this, when we've both been learning, we've all been learning it, so you did a great job.
I like a copy and play, do my own long-term budget planning.
Our next venture is the legislature.
Are there any questions or comments on this?
We could do the step, we should work our way up.
All right. Then the matter lies with the committee. I was gonna move back to mine. That press a real hard twice.
Okay, apparently we're
Oh, there you go. There you go, yes.
Is this just an approval, or do we need recommendation for approval, or is it recommended for approval and release?
Actually, it's a recommendation to the policy committee. Actually, what is actually here is a recommendation to the policy committee for approval of the assumptions that George outlined in the middle. But if you.
Oh, no, I'm just, that was his question. I'm just asking you formally.
Do we need to clarify about the review issue? Because we're not approving it to be released for the public review. We're approving it to go to the policy committee.
The TAC is being asked to recommend approval to the policy committee.
Okay.
To recommend the policy committee approve it.
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Miles, second by Ms. Burlingame. Are there any opposed to that motion? Hearing none, we are so moved.
Nice job.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
It's difficult to create.
All right, now you can create.
No, now we're gonna get started.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I'll point out, we're gonna have to do M&O. Vivian and I are gonna work on, because M&O is another key piece to this, and we will have to get this ready for next month. It'll be significantly easier because we only have one sheet that has the revenue and costs in there, so it'll be a much quicker process, but we will get that done to you guys at the next meeting to look at.
You said you'll have a draft of the overall in May for us to review for June.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe I'll bring that. Sweet. White edition. Read it on the beach.
Actually, Madam Chair.
All right, next up is the item 5C, the draft policy regarding committee recruitment.
Yes, so when we had our discussion of the Citizen Advisory Committee bylaws and the operating agreement amendment, et cetera, we were asked to create some version of something that was designed to document or lay out a suggestion for how we were going to fill positions on the Citizen Advisory Committee and/or all of the advisory committees. So this is what straw man, et cetera, that I threw together. I did get comments from Cindy, and I apologize for not printing it off. They're really good comments, a lot of specifics on opening it up to, here's how you would fill a freight advisory committee seat, here's how you would fill a bike and ped committee seat, and who would be the people on that committee, that little, nominating committee or approval committee. But this is kind of here before you today to start the process. As you know, clearly the operating agreement revision and the draft bylaws are out for public review right now for 30 days. So, we have some time to expect that to not be approved until probably the March or the April policy committee meeting. But they're for you for some discussion, I guess.
So they're here for discussion, or are they here with the intent of
Well, when we talked about it last time, it was asked to send those around before the policy committee meeting. And I did that, but didn't get the sense that we were ready to approve them yet. Have some discussion, but it could be wrong.
I'll start off.
I know, I was gonna say.
Actually, I think we should, we can discuss it for sure, but I think we should table the action for future meetings for a couple reasons. One, while the operating agreement is up for public comment, and then it sounded two of the policy committee members in the last policy committee meeting are questioning whether or not to have one at all. So it seems like until that answer is completed, that it might just be, we should probably wait until we know for sure whether that committee is gonna happen before we really get serious about recruiting for that committee. And second, I would like to have the comments and the layout that I had sent out by email before us to discuss this part of it. So I just think since we don't have that piece, and I forgot to bring it too, so it's, me too, that it might just be better to table the action, but we could obviously discuss it. But I just think for working or an action, I think it should be delayed.
I'm gonna make a motion. Or no? Just say-
Well, we have to discuss it, and then see if these guys have comments before we can,
Okay. I have no problem. Sorry, I'm in agreement with you in the sense that I don't know if I want to invest the time digging that much into it if we don't know if it's gonna come to fruition, so. yeah.
Well, what's the recommendation of staff? We heard from the planning commission today, and then what we heard from the policy committee, I think it's only from one policy. Another covers two. Is it? Yeah. I think your research has shown that most jurisdictions have a citizens advisory group, and that it provides a valuable resource to the process, so what's the step?
I think it's very valuable to have a citizen advisory committee. I do like the idea of having our own that we appoint, and they work for us, but they are immersed in our issues, and we can set the agenda and the times of meetings and all that sort of stuff. So I like the idea of the creation of the standalone, and so that's our recommendation, staff's recommendation.
The planning commission saw it this today, they meet regularly on a monthly basis, I meet with them a bunch, but they had concerns with the composition committee, that it needed to probably truly perhaps reflect selection on a criminal justice basis, that the way it's comprised now doesn't do that. So my understanding, this is out for public review? No.
Not yet. It's the first time.
Okay.
So this is really more like an informational, I guess, for technical.
Well, I think
to discuss.
Cindy's got a really good point. I mean, if the policy committee decides not to have one at all,
Yeah.
then we could come back and say, well, let's do this for the freight committee and the bike and ped committee, but we wouldn't need it. We could open it up to those other ones, but we wouldn't have it for a citizen advisory committee, but right now it's a little premature, I guess.
I think it needs more, the document itself, as I said in the email, has a lot of the information here was already in the bylaws. And I think in the policy, it really needs more specificity, so it's defensible. But trying to go into that without the email and not knowing the fate of that particular committee, I think is, it just would be okay to wait. I mean, I know from the TAC, we all recommended to creating and keeping the citizen advisory committee. And hopefully there'll be a number of comments on that, and maybe, the outcome will be what we're hoping it will be, but I think we can just wait on this. Discuss more details. Maybe even have a work session on it, or tie it to another work session on one of these other issues.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Are there any questions or comments from the public at this time on the draft policy regarding committee.
Madam Chair, if I might, in relation to Mr. Reader's comment on diversity and environmental justice, it may be at this time that you could provide a recommendation to the policy committee for the Citizens Advisory Committee to send forward a letter or a memo in anticipation of creating the bylaws.
We already submitted the bylaws, that's out for public comment.
So could you send another letter saying, since you don't know what their action may or may not be, is there some way to encourage them to have the Citizen Advisory Committee with additional information?
We recommended that we gave them the operating agreement and we gave them the bylaws. We recommended that they approve it, but it's out for public comment right now. When it comes back from public comment, we'll get one more chance to do another formal recommendation, and then they'll have a chance to act on it. So right now, it's out for public comment with what we propose, which is amending the operating agreement to add the Citizens Advisory Committee and with bylaws. So we have it all there. It's out for public comment. He's gotten the first set. So we have a chance, and then we'll make our recommendation again. So.
Yeah, because I think that diversity issue is something that's.
Oh yeah, we talked about that in the thing. Environmental justice was one of the items we thought we actually talked about, and we get picked up, but we might have to reconsider it.
I was just going to echo Mr. Weaver's statement, and also while we were in our certification review yesterday, there was conversation about the diversity as part of our committees and how some of them are lacking. So I think it's a really important issue to look at when we have the chance.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the public?
I move that we table this action item for another meeting or work session.
Second.
Here's by myself, seconded by everyone. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, we are so moved. Are there, so are there any other business items at this time? No? All right, then we move on to our informational reports. First up, 6A is the 2014 AMATS certification review.
Before I introduce our federal partners there, I'm remiss in not introducing Bob Laurie with the DOT headquarters. He came up for the certification review as well. He's the, among other, about 300 different hats. He's the bike and pit coordinator for the state. We are in close contact for our numbers out of the state all the time, so we're happy to have him up for the certification as well. I believe John Laurie with FHWA will be presenting, but I'm wrong, but here you go.
Thank you. Certification review is something that Federal Highway and Federal Transit do as a joint review every 4 years. So the last one was 2011, so it was due. We got a bunch of documents from Craig in advance, sent him pages and pages of questions that he answered in advance. We reviewed those, and then this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, did interviews and discussions all day. And I guess the summary conclusion, our first thoughts on it is that there are no corrective actions, no findings with corrective actions this go around. There are some observations, some recommendations, and then some good practices that we'd like to highlight. But I think it was a real good review, and we appreciate the time that the staff put into preparation and during this week, having the patience to answer our questions.
So no corrective action. First, and that's good news. It's very good news. Great.
Madam Chair? Yes. I'd just like to say, that sounds to me like staff's doing a hell of a job.
I'd like to recognize that. Good job. I'm sure.
Can I say hello on the record?
So
Now I'm trying to think of things I've said in this.
So, John, when is your expectation for a final report to the policy committee? We could distribute to the policy committee.
May.
Okay.
And that would have all the recommendations and conversations. Great.
Are there any other questions?
Anybody?
Yeah, I was gonna say, any questions from the public?
Not a question. I wanted to thank the people from FHWA. They have really helped us get to where we are today by giving us classes on congestion management and performance-based planning and other things. And ITS architecture update. We've had several reviews of ours. And I just want to thank them because this was a learning opportunity for us as well.
Thank you. The Resource Center at Federal Highways, that's what we try to do, is deliver training in technical assistance. And yesterday and the day before was a demonstration of the good work that the AMATS staff has performed. And I think this is my third certification review that I've been up here, so I've really seen progress over the years on a number of the products. Congestion management process and others come to mind. And I will just briefly mention, we discussed this brave new future of planning and programming that's on the horizon with performance-based planning and programming. And Federal Highways will have some training materials to support our DOT and MPO partners in adapting to a performance-based planning and programming approach. And I would just encourage all the partners to begin talking about that framework and consulting our performance-based planning and programming guidebook that we have on our website in anticipation of the final rulemaking, so that it's not anything that a discussion that waits too long, particularly with prospective measures, the data that would be needed to support monitoring, performance measurement, and in particular target setting, because just personally I think target setting will be one of the more problematic aspects of performance-based planning and programming. And of course the state DOT will take the lead in setting the statewide targets, and the MPOs will be doing their regional targets in cooperation and, may I say the word collaboration, with with the DOT. But those kinds of informal discussions beginning now, and maybe they already have, I think is certainly a proactive measure. So just
I know we've been talking about it.
Great.
We know it's coming.
Yeah, it is coming for sure.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments from the public? Thank you. So next up is item 6B, the freight mobility update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You have a memo before you, and I can say I am so happy after the advance. The freight mobility RFP study is on the street. Thank you, Mr. Weaver and Craig, for helping us move that forward through the procurement process. It's been a long time coming. The proposal should be due mid-March. We just released it on February the 18th. So you have some information on that. One of the interesting aspects that we reported on earlier is that a large amount was crowdfunded through the freight community, the state, the Alaska Railroad, and some other partners. So that was a huge hurdle that we had to get past, and we did. And so the former Port Director Rich Wilson and Ace Thompson with the Alaska Trucking Association just did great work doing that for us. So we continue taking a look at site plan road design reviews, such as big box retail, seeing how freight it moves in and out of those particular facilities, and to offer their thoughts on loading docks, etc. The Freight Committee offered input on the TIP criteria, so they worked on TIP criteria to update the TIP process and nomination process, and then most recently they provided input on the CMP surveys, and we're stakeholders in that, so that they've been really useful there. And as you may know, there's a national freight network and a primary freight network, and they offered their comments and letters to Secretary Fox on that. And they also did a public service announcement radio spot last winter, and they'll do another one. We'll just repeat the same radio announcement, and I'm happy to send that PSA on to you. I know many of you have heard it, and so that was really fun for them to get out a message to other drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists on large commercial vehicle movements. I don't know if you have any questions.
Comment. I have to say, I think this is the first time I've seen crowdsourcing in AMATS memo, so that's.
Yeah. Thank you, NPR. I was on my way to work, driving in the morning, trying to figure out a way to come up with a local match, and they were discussing crowdfunding. And I walked into Craig's office and said, "Can I do it?" And he said, "Go to legal." I said, "Okay." And so that's how it started, but it was really the partners on the Freight Advisory Committee that made it happen in the state. So thank you.
Teresa, I know we were talking about a freight forum, and that was going to
Yes.
try and coincide with the freight RFP, but it's been delayed.
It was delayed as a result. We wanted to have the RFP out, a consultant out, so that we could get our shippers and carriers there. So once we get this RFP and the consultant selected, we'll move forward with that freight forum so that we can get all the people in the room. We had originally scheduled it for early January, but due to the procurement process, we just were not able to follow through on that. With our freight mobility study, we're really trying to also coordinate it with the statewide long-range transportation plan and their freight element to make sure that the goals are consistent, and then also allow them a forum to discuss the statewide long-range transportation plan.
Any other questions? Any questions or comments from the public? Hearing none, we're on to item 6C, the Alaska Railroad Corporation update.
Ken Morton's giving it.
It's coming in late. You got volunteers.
What I did was, rather than do a big screeny thing, I came in with a lot of data on slides that I'll just briefly touch on going through. I wanted to make sure you had the information to go home and ponder versus having just throw a bunch of numbers at you. So I think, at least on the first slide, if you will, just some quick facts. We are an independent corporation owned by the state. We have a seven-member board. Two of those board members are there by effectively road. One is the DOT commissioner, the other is the commissioner of the Department of Economic Development, other things. The other five are appointed by the governor. We are mandated to be self-supporting, and we are responsible for our own financial and legal obligations. We generally have about 586 miles of track strewn between Seward and Fairbanks. We have both freight and passengers. Last year, as an example, we moved about 468,000 passengers year-round. The majority of those, obviously, were between May and September. Generally, we have about 575 people on average. That goes up and down, obviously, seasonally. Summer with folks working on the track, as well as our number of trains go up and down in the summer. Our freight revenue historically has largely been petroleum out of North Pole. When I started with the railroad in 2006, I think it was actually 56% of the business. As that refinery has started to decline and eventually shut down towards the beginning of this year, that amount of traffic petroleum traffic has significantly been reduced. Other sectors, for the most part, have been fairly stable. However, recently the coal market, the bottom fell out on the coal market worldwide, so I don't know. We've not moved much of any coal for the last 4 or 5 months, and we're not looking to move anytime soon. So, the good news is, however, there has been a fair amount of activity up on the north slope, and we're seeing a lot of offsets with our interchange business. A lot of pipe ships coming in, a lot of that sort of stuff that have offset a lot of those losses of revenue. Passenger service, like I said, historically, we've been doing about 500,000 a year. With the recession in 2008, 2009, that dipped about 10-20%. It hasn't quite gotten back to where it was. What a lot of people don't realize is about half the folks that we move are actually on private cars. The Princesses of the world, the Hollands of the world, the Royal Caribbeans and those folks oftentimes do a lot of package business. They do some with us, but if you look at our trains, a lot of them have, instead of blue and gold cars on them, at the end they've got some other random color of cars. And actually, Princess will be our largest customer in that arena. We actually run their own trains at this point. So, we also have a lot of real estate. We've got about 36,000 acres statewide. Of that, about 1/3 of it is sort of traditional right-of-way. We've got track centered within about 200 feet, basically between Seward and Fairbanks, and there's some branch lines in there. And some of the branch lines are a little bit weird depending on when they were built. But, another 1/3 of that's terminals, like the Anchorage Yard down here. We've got one in Fairbanks and Seward and everywhere else. Taking trains apart, putting trains together, putting fuel in trains, fixing broken trains, all that sort of thing. And then about 1/3 of it is just reserve lands. The idea behind that was that those lands were meant to support the operation of the railroad. So we've got, the real estate department has sort of, I hate to call them land developers, but that's, for lack of a better term, that's what they are. And we have 10, 12,000 acres. Some of it strategically located in Fairbanks and Anchorage, and some of it not so strategically located in Clear. So,
Well, for example, Brian, I know down right adjacent to the port and behind the security gate, Crowley and Flint Hills are both actually on railroad property. So is the ABI.
right. Yeah, and we've got some, just like every real estate outfit, we've got some interesting arrangements. We've got one parcel down there, fairly good size, that we lease to the city. The city leases it back to us, and then we lease it to Flint Hills. And all those leases are still valid. And
You ought to see that paperwork.
yeah, there's a bunch of checks crossing in the mail, and I'm not sure whether we come out ahead or behind. About 75% of our net income, though, at the end of the day, comes from those real estate holdings, so it is important to us. As you are aware from actually actions earlier in this meeting, we do receive FTA federal formula funds because we provide year-round regularly scheduled passenger service. 2013, there was an attempt to actually, I believe, zero them out. This was not a cut in the program at all. This was really more directly focusing on cutting the Alaska Railroad out of it. Due to some political issues within the Senate. We weren't zeroed out, but they were reduced. And that does affect the well-being of our railroad as far as being able to maintain all of this stuff. We hope that with the next transportation bill that some of that will get restored, but we don't know when the next transportation bill will happen, whether we'll have 16 quarters of holdover or whether we'll get a new bill this year. So. Downturns in freight traffic, as you saw, they started to really start to manifest in 2008 as Flint Hills started to ramp down. We had lost over 300 positions in 3 separate downsizings, but in doing so, the mandate from the executive office was to make sure that the railroad didn't look any different on the outside, even though there was less of it on the inside. And likewise, we've been fairly aggressive in seeking out new lines of business, some of which I'll touch on here a little bit. You see our net income there. all that net income gets directly reinvested in the railroad. And even though, like I said, we had a downturn in the freight business last year, we were able to capitalize on some cost savings and so forth internally that we actually turned it into a net positive for the year. Surprised a lot of people. Some of the projects, we finished up the first piece of the Northern Rail extension. There's a picture of it. The bridge over the Canada River, 3,300 feet. It's now the longest bridge in Alaska. The next page shows a bunch of politicians with scissors.
Scissors.
Yes. So, from the grand opening that was in August. The following page is Port McKenzie Rail Extension, local to home, just on the other side of the inlet. That project, we've actually been doing in cooperation with the borough. The borough is trying to develop the port out there at Point McKenzie. They have gone and worked with the state to get capital money and then came to us to help them build it. At $303 million for 35 miles of track, we've got $184 million worth of funding that at this point is entirely committed and is substantially under construction. It's about half built as of now. By the end of the summer, it'll be about 2/3 built. And depending on whether they're successful wrangling any more money out of the legislature this year will determine how quickly it will be done.
How many miles? Okay.
35. And in addition to that 35 miles of track, there's a bunch of other stuff that had to get done, just where it was. So people ask, when will it be open? And I always say, well, it depends on whether you write me one giant check or whether you give me $10 million a year for the next 15 years.
We say the same thing.
Right. Realistically, we're about 30 to 36 months from opening it. If there's some right-of-way idiosyncrasies with DNR that the borough is trying to work out, as well as, just need more money to keep the construction moving.
It's like a decent road one, Brian. Thanks.
It is the nicest road in the borough. Then, next page.
Well, why ruin it with railroad tracks?
Because the second R is railroad, not railroad. So. We'll see how it goes. If it never gets any more funding than this, it might wind up being a road. We'll see, except the bridges are really narrow. Positive train control. That is an unfunded federal mandate. The railroad by statute is required to operate passenger trains. And due to some accidents in the 2005 to 2008 timeframe, the Federal Railroad Administration was ordered by Congress that anybody running passenger trains or toxic invalids, or I can't remember the exact name, but basically things like anhydrous ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, stuff that pretty much you're dead before you realize you're breathing in, have to implement positive train control, and it needs to do 4 things. It needs to prevent trains going too fast. It needs to prevent trains from going on the wrong track. It needs to prevent trains from running into each other. And it needs to prevent trains running through work groups, folks actually working on the track. To date, we've spent about $69 million on what is, I can't remember the budget this week, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of a $160 million project. We have received some money from the state for that. By law, it is supposed to be up and running by the end of 2015. Every railroad in the country is working on this, and none of us are going to make it. So we're all sort of waiting to see what's going to happen. I don't know if I can say that because technically we can be fine by saying we aren't going to make it.
You're still trying.
We're still trying. And actually, that's sort of what we're doing, if we're showing meaningful progress. It's one of these situations where all the technology existed when the law was written, but nobody ever implemented to make it all work together. And it is a science project of gargantuan proportions. The biggest flaws from our standpoint is it generally assumed that you had electricity, which fully 1/3 of our system doesn't have. We had cell phone service. which only a third of our system doesn't have. And we are spending as much on communication systems and power as we are on a lot of the rest of this. So, there's a couple things as to why, some really nifty pictures of train crashes. And the other thing is that we constantly get asked, well, how do we get out of it? And the reality is, the only way we get out of it is we stop running passenger trains, which the cost of that is then after that. Couple things. FRA basically can fine us up to $100,000 a day for not having it in service. And the wonderful thing about that is it's not just fining the Alaska Railroad Corporation $100,000 a day. They can fine people individually for $100,000 a day. So every now and then people get this sort of independent public disobedience sort of bent saying, we'll just do it, but fine you. Well, that means Mr. O'Leary's salary is going to have to go up a lot because they'll be finding him. So it's really not interesting. We have had some work done by McDowell Group looking at what the railroad looked like without passenger service. And to make a long story short, our staff would be cut in half. But that didn't, and because of the amount of passengers that we move, particularly in and out of some of the more remote areas of the state, both south of Portage to Seward, dealing with the cruise ships, getting them out to Denali Park, Capit, and so forth, it really sort of dominoes pretty badly. And it will result in a significant amount more stress on the highway system as suddenly somebody wants to get in the bus business to do well. But anyway, so we are working on that, and we are down asking for more money again this year. And this is not a good year to be in front of Juneau asking for money, but there we are. Some of the other opportunities we're looking at, I think we're starting to take a harder look at our intermodal business. We have, like I said, seen a lot of uptick on our interchange business. Things coming down the pipe as the state looks at LNG and other things like that, but not only the construction of it, but potentially even some the shipping of some of it. We've got 10 different people with 15 different plans, and we're just waiting for one of them to hit. So,
Yeah, and the reason I was late today is because the logistics group was at the port.
Yep.
And we've been, very interested in the rail connection on the board.
Yeah. Yeah, we've spent actually most of the week with, is it P&L, PCL, or, yeah, PRL, and those folks. Also, oddly enough, we've had a lot of increased business down at Seward recently on the maritime side. And we're actually spending a lot of time trying to look at Seward, what is Seward going to be when it grows up, sort of thing. We have a Tiger grant for a master planning effort down there. We're waiting for your ad to actually start on. Then we got a picture of our BART service. Kind of looks like the clamp that's going across the Gulf of Alaska. But basically, we've got scheduled BART service once a week with our partner Linden. They have room for about 200 plus or minus containers up above us, and we can put about 30, 40 rail cars down below. For the last couple of months, we've been running extra barges just because of the amount of rail traffic that's been sitting in Seattle waiting to come up here. We also have a connection with Canadian National that's more of on a 10-day turn that's just pure railroad cars.
Is that uptick, the extra barges, is that because anything to do with the West Coast Longshore strike, or
No. No, this is all going north. I mean, we've got a lot of the folks that do value-added services for pipes in Fairbanks, whether it's coating, whether it's joining, whether it's polishing them, I don't know what they do to them. I mean, every square foot of property we have in Fairbanks right now is a stacked pipe on it. And I'm not sure what's driving it, but there seems it's all going north on the Gulf. So, interestingly enough, Exxon had a bunch of pipe for something that never happened. So it sat up there for 3 years, and then they sold it and we hauled it back south again. So it all pays the same. I'm hoping Shell buys it, and we just bring it back north. We'll wait and see. Anyway, a whole bunch of information. If there's any questions, I can try to answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll at least make it up.
Any questions? I already asked them. Any questions or comments from the public? Next up, item 16, the bicycle pedestrian advisory committee update regarding NACO and bicycle design guide.
I'll start. Joni wants to add, you can. As you remember, this BPAC, our BPAC had a letter suggesting the use of the NACO guide as one of the tools in the toolbox, and requesting that both the MOA and the DOT recognize that idea. We brought it here, and then it went to the policy committee, and then the policy committee asked that we send it back to the BPAC to have some clarifying discussions and have a presentation there by both the DOT and the city. We had what I would call a spirited meeting. Finance would usually refer to these as a sporty meeting. Last night, we are probably looking to have another special meeting on that topic alone, and possibly a work session with the BPAC, kind of get a little closer together, see if we can come to a little more agreement on certain things. So, don't know if there's too much more to add, except for to let you know that we are progressing and seeing where we can get, seeing if we can come to some agreement where the letter will come out that will be acceptable to both the TAC and the policy committee. So, I don't know if Joni wants to add anything, or that kind of clarified, okay.
The last item is item 60, the coordinated transportation plan update.
Okay, so as you'll see, there's a scheduled meeting for March 11th at 9 a.m. It'll be in this building, in this room actually, and it's going to be kicking off the update to the 2009 Human Service Transportation Coordination Plan. Rather than just kind of doing a quick glossy overview, it will be a little bit more in depth because of the changes that were brought forth in MAP 21. Public transportation, paratransit, and human service transportation really saw a shift in their funding, and so ultimately that does affect their availability to provide services to what are traditionally vulnerable populations, which include youth, seniors, people that experience disabilities, low-income populations, veterans, and limited English proficiency populations. So we'll just be kicking that off next week. Some of the stakeholders that we're looking to engage are going to be riders of the public transportation system, the paratransit system, anchor rides, agencies that purchase public transportation and paratransit service. So, the Office of Public Assistance and agencies like that. And then, of course, the transportation providers themselves, and then the general community and anybody else that's interested in human service transportation. So I'm anticipating potentially hearing some chatter from Uber, perhaps, and also the cabs. So I know that when a little bit of money comes available from time to time, such as the money that comes with coordinated transportation, they kind of reared their heads a little bit and appeared to be interested in playing in the same sandbox. So looking forward to kicking that off. This plan actually expired towards the end of 2014, so this is perfect timing to be working on drafting the new one. So I'll be working with Judy Timmick with Public Transportation. She's getting ready to retire in April, so this will kind of be her last hurrah in a planning effort. So
37
We're in.
wake-ups, as she told me this morning.
What's that?
She told me 37 more get-ups.
Yep. I told her that
I don't know, I'm
too.
a...
Drop it like that.
That is a metric.
I know, I don't know if I've ever phrased it that way.
I had to get up 37 more times, that's how it was. I'm like,
Yeah, but what happens on the 38th, you die?
make this stuff up, I'm trying.
You know, when we, in Vivian's schedule that she provided at the last meeting, looking at the MTP, the integrated pieces and parts, I think we had scheduled through December. I'm hoping that it's not going to take more than probably the late fall. That's my goal, is to really get it moving. One of the things that I will do, and with MAP 21 and the performance-based planning that's coming through with that, we actually did get a proposed final rulemaking, for the 5310 funds. So we actually have some concrete guidance to move forward on the FTA side with that. And so that'll be kind of nice to be able to pick that up and run with and not worry about it changing midstream. So I'm excited about that. But you know, really looking on kind of streamlining the focus on people. You know, human service transportation really is about people. It's moving them efficiently and moving more of them. And how do we do that? And how do we take the stress off of the paratransit system and really provide other options so that it is affordable and that these vulnerable populations can get to and from where they need to go. So, great. Questions?
Jamie, do you know if the folks in the Valley are going to be just attending because they have their own little...
Yeah, they have their own group. The Valley has their own coordinating group.
Process.
And yeah, so
Maybe we can learn from this, maybe.
they could learn from us. Well, we have different funding sources, so
Okay.
that's part of the challenge. We have primarily public transit providers, and they have primarily nonprofit transportation providers. So it's kind of a different ballgame, but it is still in the same spirit of how do we make small amounts of money go farther. So that's kind of. They are always invited, for sure. But I think they have their own sets of challenges. What they're dealing with the consolidation out there. So that's all I got.
Any questions or comments from the public?
Sorry, what time did you say that meeting was?
It's on the schedule. It's from 9 to 10 a.m. on the 11th.
Just next Wednesday.
Yes.
Yeah, they were out.
I'm sorry? Oh,
Okay.
sorry about that.
I had to look
June
at
agendas.
All right, are there any other info items for this time?
We at the railroad, effective actually last Sunday, have almost completely revamped our railroad company. Due to, it had changed since before transfer and it was no longer functioning properly. We've split up the responsibilities for that between real estate, who's going to handle the more real estate stuff, and we now have a right-of-way and public projects department that's going to deal with anything that's on the right-of-way and all the intricacies of coordinating trains and maintenance of way and security and stuff. For those who want to know who you should be dealing with, we made it very simple. If there's a track within 100 feet of where you're standing, you're going to be dealing with right-of-way. If you're standing on a road out in one of our reserves and there's a bunch of buildings around, you still get to deal with real estate. But we had an open house, I think, last week, and I can answer more details and stuff, but actually, it's all now on the website, including forms, instructions, everything. It is an interim because we're supposed to have a new corporate website the first of the year, and we didn't. And now it's looking like May for the corporate website, so we had to smash the new corporate stuff with all of the really cool functionality into the old website. It's nowhere near as functional. But it's all there, but we have to do it.
Any other questions from Brian on that? Any other informational items? Any other committee comments at this time? got through a lot today. I appreciate it, everybody. I mean, our next scheduled meeting is actually the coordinated transportation meeting next Wednesday that Jamie just told us all about at 9 a.m. Followed by the policy meeting, the committee meeting on March 26th. It's a little bit more separated this month because of spring break, and we'll be back here April 9th. We are in.
I have a phone.